here's our PO2 of the blood, right? And that factor, the partial pressure of oxygen, is going to play a big role in our talk today. Okay, so PO2 is how much oxygen is dissolved in the liquid, in the fluid, in the water, in an area. Okay, which is slightly different than how much oxygen is in the blood. Okay, because most oxygen in the blood is bound to hemoglobin, not dissolved in water. Okay, so more on that later. But PO2 is the amount of oxygen that's dissolved in the water. Now that factor, PO2, is going to vary according to where you are, right? If you're right next to the alveoli, your PO2 is going to be really high. If you're inside a really busy cell, your PO2 is going to be really, really low, right? Because all the oxygen is going to have been used up. All right, so if we sort of take the pulmonary capillary across its length and look at how PO2 changes, we can see that the PO2 of the entering blood, which is 40, we're going to call that low for oxygen, right? Low end for oxygen in the blood is 40. High end is 100, 110. All right? So we can see that very quickly, like before you get to the halfway point of this pulmonary capillary, the PO2 of the blood passing through equals the PO2 of the alveolus, right? So blood came in at 40. It's traveling next to a PO2 of 104. So it equilibrates, right? Diffusion happens. Oxygen diffuses in. So by the time we get to about a third of the way through, our PO2 of the blood is equal to in the alveolus. Okay, the lung has done its job as far as oxygen goes. It has taken blood, put it next to air, and therefore elevated the oxygen concentration. Okay, so this happens very quickly, like it doesn't take the whole length of the capillary bed because that respiratory membrane is so thin, right? So it promotes diffusion so that this equilibration can happen very quickly. All right, so the blood going into the alveolus has a PO2 of 40. The blood leaving the alveolus has a PO2 of 104. Right? So this is coming from the systemic tissues. This is going out to the systemic tissues. All right? So this is the oxygen capture point. All right, if we look here, this graph is showing you how PO2 changes as we go through the different parts of the circulatory system. Okay, so if we start in the venous blood, right? So it's past the capillary bed, heading back to the heart. On the systemic side, oh, look at that. It's a PO2 of 40. We just saw that. We go through the pulmonary capillaries. That's this picture. Okay, now we're up to 100. Now, as we enter the systemic circulation, you'll see a slight reduction in oxygenation. This is because some of the blood that passed through the lungs didn't pick up any oxygen. Okay, because of dead space and because of zone 3 areas, right, that we talked about the other day. So we have some amount of shunt. Shunt blood is blood that went through the lungs but didn't pick up any oxygen. Okay, so it's partially deoxygenated. If we mix the shunt blood with the blood that passed through the alveolar, that picked up oxygen, we're going to get a slight decrease in PO2. Right, because we're mixing not oxygenated blood with oxygenated blood. Okay, then here we are in the arterial system. Very little change in PO2. There is a slight change in PO2 as we go through the arterial system, just because every living cell will grab oxygen if it can, and if it needs to. So we lose a little. I have another picture of that later. But then we get to the systemic capillaries, and now we see the PO2 drops fairly rapidly. Why? Because we're delivering the oxygen at that point, right? We're dumping the oxygen in the tissues. We're unloading that oxygen so that the cells in those busy areas can use them. So by the time we pass through our systemic capillaries, we're back to 40 again.